Real esoteric spirituality without all of the fluff, without all of the nonsense. This is the thunderwizard.com YouTube channel. Click subscribe and then hit the little bell button so that you can be notified whenever I've uploaded a video or when I'm doing the live Q&A videos. Good evening, Thunder Wizards. I'm hoping that you can hear me. I'm assuming that you can. So, today, I want to talk to you about dragons. What do dragons signify in the ancient traditions? So somebody recently asked me about dragons, and the response, I think, was rather shocking because dragons are very popular. I myself, I have a dragon on my wall over here. I've always been fascinated with them. I think they're cool. Who doesn't like them? But in the mythology, dragons have a very specific symbolism. And dragons have different symbolism in different cultures. And so I'm going to be comparing the two mythologies about dragons. One thing that I will say about dragons is this. Dragons have a strong connection to human beings and to human beings' ability to achieve spiritual evolution. And so if we take these two different visions of dragons that I'm going to be sharing with you, I'm going to be sharing the Norse tradition of what dragons are, and I'm going to be sharing with you the Taoist, the ancient Chinese shamanic tradition about dragons. And you're going to see that on the surface they're very different. But when we take a look at what they're really pointing towards, because they're pointing towards something, when we really look at that, then we find out that they're talking about the same thing. But before I get into it, I'm going to say that dragons and humans have a strong connection. You can't have one without the other. So let's start with what's more interesting. The more interesting one is, let's start with the Taoist tradition about dragons. So the Taoist tradition about dragons is that dragons are seen as being mysterious and magical. And there's a really famous quote by Confucius. So first off, when we're talking about Lao Tzu, because we're going to talk about Lao Tzu in a second. Lao Tzu is supposedly the author of the Tao Te Ching. But there's a lot of controversy over whether he was a real person and or if he was one person or many. So Lao Tzu just means old master, old man. And so anybody could have been that. You know, anybody who's considered to be a master could be seen as an elder. So another translation of Lao Tzu could just be elder, you know, wise elder. So we don't know if he really existed or not. But according to a quote from Confucius, see, Lao Tzu is one pronunciation, Lao Tzu. Confucius is actually Kung Fu Tzu. Kung Fu Tzu means the master of Kung Fu. Now, when I say Kung Fu, you think martial arts. Kung Fu does not translate as martial arts. Kung Fu translates as discipline or knowledge or, you know, a specific, you know, to be a Kung Fu master doesn't mean I practice martial arts. It means I practice discipline. So a certain type of Kung Fu is a discipline, a skill. So Kung Fu Tzu, Confucius, was the guy who talked about how to be a good citizen in Chinese mythology, not mythology, in Chinese culture. So he's looked to when you want to be a good Chinese citizen, you follow what Lao Tzu says, all the things that you're supposed to do in public, how you do this and how you do that, all the ritual, how you dress, your manners, your etiquette, thinking. It was all about being a good and functional person in society. Whereas Lao Tzu doesn't conform to that. Lao Tzu says, don't have any restrictions. That you go after the Tao, which is the inherent truth in the universe, and you follow the natural law. So there's the natural law of Lao Tzu versus the law of culture and tradition, which is Kung Fu Tzu, or Confucius. So apparently, according to the tradition, Kung Fu Tzu, Confucius went to go see Lao Tzu. And he came back, and his students said, tell us about Lao Tzu. And he says, Confucius says, a dragon is a magic, I'm not quoting verbatim, but he said something to the effect of, a dragon is a magical being. You don't know where he comes from or where he's going. He's a mystery. And he says, Lao Tzu is a dragon. So in the Taoist tradition, whenever you especially like if you're doing some kind of esoteric meditation or a martial arts form or a certain move, if it has dragon in it, like the red dragon, there's a meditation called the red dragon. There's a martial set that the Grand Master of our sect taught, which was called The Dragon and the Phoenix. And it's this dance between these two mythical beings. A dragon represents a human being that has achieved immortality through his spiritual practices. So whenever you see dragons in Chinese drawings or mythology, it represents a master, a spiritual master that has gone beyond the human realm and has become this mysterious being that we know as dragons. And so that is what Kung Fu Tzu, Confucius, was saying about Lao Tzu. When he was asked, tell us about Lao Tzu, he says, Lao Tzu is a dragon, meaning you don't know where he's coming from or where he's going. He's too mysterious. He was tipping his hat because both of these guys, according to at least this particular quote, both of these guys were both seen as the masters of Chinese society. And one of them was the esoteric mystical side, and the other one was the guy in society, the cultured, well-educated society master of tradition and culture. And they were at odds with each other. Because Kung Fu Tzu, Confucius says, here's what you do. Here's what a good person does. If you want to be a successful person, you live like this. And here are the things that you do. Here's what you say. Here are the rituals. This is how you benefit society. Your job is to bring something to the conforms of society and make society a better place. And Lao Tzu was saying, screw society. Be better because it's the right thing to do. And Lao Tzu would say, if you want to be a leader, then the best way to lead is to influence people to do things and never let them know that you had anything to do with it. So you have a light touch. He would say things like, if you want to overcome your enemy, have nothing to hide, have nothing to protect. If you have nothing to protect, then there's nothing for anybody to attack you with. And this is you can take this into martial arts, whereas if you stand and you stand in a rigid stance, then you can get knocked off of your stance. The more effort. Okay. So I've actually done that where you become nothing, and then people can't do anything. They can't grab you, they can't throw you, they can't strike you because there's nothing for them to hit. And it's very, I've been able to do this where it's very confusing. People how did you do that? And I said, I didn't do anything. That's the whole point. In terms of like, this is what jujitsu is all about. Why jujitsu is such a powerful technique, because jujitsu is waiting for you to overcommit. So you see those guys on the ground and they're rolling around on the ground, and you don't know what they're doing. Each side is waiting for the other person to overcommit. And once you overcommit to something, then you have something you can use. Get the guy in an arm bar, get him in a leg bar, or a wrist lock, or get him around the neck. But, I have a friend of mine, I'm not into jiu-jitsu, but I have a friend of mine who is. And, I've rolled around on the ground with him before, and he'll wait for me to do something, and he'll go, thank you, and he'll get me into some lock, something somewhere. As long as, once I commit to something, then he has something. The more force you put towards something. This is what Aikido is about. Aikido is actually a battlefield, with swords and knives. And so you wait till somebody makes this big attack, and then now you have something to redirect. So this is what Lao Tzu is saying. Don't be anything. You don't have anything to attack. You don't have anything to defend. Then you can't be made a target of. Only when you have something to defend can you be a target. This is going to come later because we're going to be talking about dragons in the Norse mythology. And so remember what I'm saying now, because it's all going to come back later. Okay, so just remember that. All right, so a dragon in Chinese Taoist understanding is, again, an immortal. And it means somebody who has done his meditations or changed his energy body to such a degree that he phases out of existence, he or she phases out of physical existence and becomes a perfected immortal. Perfected immortals are symbolized by dragons. So whenever you see dragons, they're talking about that. Even if it's just for decoration, it's still an unconscious symbol of a human being achieving their highest true potential. And so there's that. Now that is going to sound very different from what we're going to talk about when we talk about the Norse tradition of dragons. But in the Norse tradition of dragons, you also have this same connection, a strong connection to human beings. So according to Norse mythology, we'll talk about one dragon, the most, I believe the most famous one in Norse mythology, whose name is Fafnir. And Fafnir, it's kind of hard because some people say he's the son of a dwarf king. But if you just read it at face value, he's seen as a human. And so there's nothing about him that distinguishes him from other human beings. In fact, he's supposed to be extremely brave, and he has a strong right hand and all this kind of stuff. And his father has a connection to a hoard of treasure. And there's a magical ring involved. It's a magical golden ring that gives you the ability to continue to create an unlimited amount of gold and riches. But it has a curse attached to it. And Loki warns Fafnir's father that this ring has a curse attached to it, and that he shouldn't lust after gold. But he doesn't listen to Loki, and he uses this ring to become extremely wealthy and have this hoard of gold. So his son Fafnir becomes obsessed with the gold, and I believe he kills his father. But in any case, he becomes obsessed with the gold, and along with the gold, he has a treasure called the Helm of Awe, which is what this is. This is a symbol called the Helm of Awe. And it is used to destroy negativity. It's used to bring justice to injustice. And we could get into all of that. This is also, you can find this all over the world, by the way. This is not unique to the Norse tradition. You can find this exact same symbol all over the world. I mean, I found it in African traditions. It's in the Vedic tradition. It's called the Ashtanga Yantra, which means the eight-sided symbol. And it looks exactly like this. And in fact, I found, you won't believe it, what we would think would be bind runes. I wish I knew where I found it. I wish I could find it again. But it's an ancient document in India that was used by esoteric magicians that had what looks like bind runes. And it looks exactly like the bind runes that we find in the Icelandic magic tradition that people get these kinds of symbols from, because this is where we get it from. It's a book of magic, the Goldisbrook, I believe, that goes back to medieval times in Europe, and it was like the last known magical book of bind runes, and this is one of them that's in there. So this same book of magical symbols that I came across that was in Vedic tradition, the East Indian yogic tradition, had all of the same symbols. I couldn't believe it. And one of them was this. So these are very old symbols, this one, the Helm of Awe. But the Helm of Awe is used to terrify those who are without justice. So evil, negativity. So Fafnir has in his treasure, he has the Helm of Awe. And the hero Sigurd ends up fighting with Odin's help. He ends up fighting the dragon Fafnir, and he kills him. And as a result of that, he releases the treasure and the Helm of Awe and brings the Helm of Awe back to human beings. So we also have in modern mythology, we have the dragon in the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit. What's his name? Smaug. So understand that Tolkien, the writer of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, he got all of his information from Norse mythology. Everything that he has created, he based it on Norse mythology. So Smaug is definitely based on Fafnir. And we have the same scenario. In the Hobbit, you have the king, the heir to the throne of the kingdom of the Lonely Mountain there for the dwarf population. What's his name? What was his name? What was that guy's name? The king. I just watched it a little while ago. What was it? Anyway, some of you will remind me. Oakenshield. Thorin Oakenshield, right? So his father Thror was the king, and he lived in a mountain, which is where dwarves live, and he had this huge treasure trove of gold. Now the thing is that Smaug, the dragon, they smell gold. They live for gold. And you have the exact same scenario with Fafnir. Fafnir becomes obsessed with his father's. He's a dwarf. He's not a dragon at this point. He's portrayed as he could be human, but at some point we find out he's a dwarf. So there's nothing physically different about him than human beings. It's not that he's short and stout and stubby. He looks and acts just like a human being. But we find out later that he's a dwarf. And he is transformed into a dragon from the curse of his father's gold, because he kills his father, I believe he kills his father, to get his gold, and then he just hoards it. So the dragon is just there hoarding the gold, just like in The Hobbit, where Smaug is under the base of the mountain, he's just covered, and he just sits in all the gold. And as long as he is surrounded by his gold, he is happy. But the moment somebody comes to take the gold, then he wakes up and he causes all kinds of havoc. So listen up. You've been lied to about the nature of the Matrix. What if I told you that you could hack into the Matrix? I've done it, and I can teach you how to do it. Click below to watch the free video that I put on my YouTube channel a few years ago that has since gone viral. I discovered that the matrix, like everything else in the universe, operates from certain rules. There are 5 rules that govern the matrix. And then there is one secret technique that, to my knowledge, nobody else has figured out that allows you to hack into the matrix, understanding these 5 rules and using these 5 rules to control, manipulate, and change reality so that you can have exactly what you want out of life. Don't allow yourself to be deceived by the victim mentality that has been thrust upon you by everybody in the media and in modern society, in history, in religion. You have the power to hack into the matrix, to control your life, and have the life of your dreams. Click below, watch the free video, and then learn how you can do what I've been doing for myself over the past few years. Now, this sounds completely different from the Chinese tradition. From the Chinese tradition, the dragons are human beings who have achieved spiritual mastery and have translated, they've changed their energy and they've become perfected immortals. They're not human anymore. They're no longer in 3 dimensions. And so this is a goal. You want to become a dragon. In the Norse tradition, if you look at it and combine it with what I teach about dwarves, then a dragon is actually a de-evolution. And I think it's significant that Fafnir is confused with both being a dwarf and a human. It's hard to nail him down in the story. At some point he looks exactly like a human, and then he's said to be a dwarf, and then he transforms into a dragon. And so this has to do with the evolution of human beings in Norse mythology. Now this is, again, I'm coming from my perspective. This is me looking at Norse mythology and going as deep as I can go. And I'm coming to the conclusion that dwarves are human beings. They are not fully evolved human beings. So you can have 2 people next to each other, and one will be a human and one will be a dwarf. What's the difference? The difference is that the dwarf is a human being who is not operating from their higher man, their man, which makes them human. And so when we go after our lower instincts, and we're driven by our lower instincts of greed, lust, fear, all of those things, and here's another connection, the reptilian brainstem, then we are acting from our dwarf nature. So dwarves are very brave, they're very powerful, they're very magical, but as we see continuously, they can become obsessed with greed, with riches, with money. And the gold represents our lower drive for money, for status, for power, for control. Whenever you are living like that, it means that you are living outside of your connection to the infinite. And so you're coming from a place of fear. So people who are greedy are people who don't believe that the universe will provide them with everything that they need. And so they become obsessed with money. They become obsessed with riches, with glory, with power, with influence. This is the dwarf nature. Now, one thing that Tolkien got right, and I don't think he understood it, I think he intuited it, and he put it into his stories. What Tolkien got right is that the dwarves and the elves, when you start in The Hobbit, they're at war with each other. And the dwarves are very distrusting of the elves. And then later in The Lord of the Rings, you see that Gimli, I think his name is, Gimli, when he meets the elf queen of all of the elves, he falls madly in love with her. And he, when she's giving out all of the presents, all of the gifts of power to, the company that's going off to do whatever they do. He just wants a lock of her hair. That's all he wants. He just wants, or maybe just a strand of her hair. And he says she's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen, and he can't get his eyes off of her. Now, just before that, he was talking about how you can't trust them, and elves are evil, and you can't anymore. But as soon as he sees her, when he sees the true essence of the elf, he falls in love with her. And this represents our lower nature, our lower self. When it is in alignment with our higher self, then all of our lower nature powers, which is the powers of magic, the powers to create the universe, all of the gifts of power that the gods have, they got from the dwarves. Thor's hammer, right? All of them, they come from the dwarves. The dwarves and their magical, they represent life force energy to create the physical universe. In fact, the four directions, north, south, east, and west, are said to be dwarves. So dwarves are hugely powerful beings. And they have a direct connection with the physical reality. North, south, east, and west is another way of talking about three-dimensional reality. And what is three-dimensional reality? It is space-time. You can't have one without the other. You have space-time. And we live in this three-dimensional space-time, which is created by the dwarves. What that means is that you create reality through your lower self. And the question is whether or not we take that ability to create our reality into creating from a connection to our higher essence, or from our lower, less evolved reptilian brainstem. And so, again, the way that you can look at Fafnir is that Fafnir is a human who became disconnected from his higher self, and therefore he is identifying from his lower dwarf nature. And he becomes so obsessed with power and money and greed, he reverts all the way back to his reptilian brainstem, which is a dragon. Another word for dragon is worm. In the Old Norse, worm meant dragon. So when you see a snake, you're also talking about a dragon. So a dragon could be a snake, it could have arms, but we're talking about the reptilian brainstem. So from the Taoist tradition, what we can glean from that is that they're not trying to dismiss our reptilian brainstem origins. They are seeking to bring that to its highest elevation. So they're still saying that human beings are the highest evolution of life. And so the dragon, it represents the reptilian brainstem, or our lower nature, achieving its highest expression as a dragon. But dragons are very powerful. So really what we're talking about is, what are you going to do with your power? Are you going to create destruction? Are you going to fight against your higher essence, which in the Norse tradition is represented by Sigurd, the hero? Are you going to end up being destroyed by that? Are you going to oppose that? Or like in the Lord of the Rings, are you going to be in opposition to the elf nature, the higher self? Because in both of those, we have them coming together, and if we take the Hobbit, for example, in the end of the Hobbit, all of the orcs and the goblins and the orcs and the evil sorcerers, they all come together to fight the humans and the dwarves and the elves. So you always have humans, dwarves, and elves on one side, And then you have orcs and goblins and evil sorcerers on the other. And these represent the two natures within us. We're either going after our own destruction or we're going after towards our evolution. And so the dwarf nature, when it is aligned with the elf nature, when you have the harmonics of those two, you have the human being. So a true human being is the harmonic of the elf and the dwarf coming together, creating a human. And that human beings are representative of the projection of these two energies, the elf nature and the dwarf nature coming together. It creates this three-dimensional space-time being we call human beings. Because dwarves are not physical beings. And we know this from, I forget what it's called, but it's another magical book from the Middle Ages, and it was written during the Christian era, so you have this combination of traditional Germanic mythology and Christian mythology together, and it's called Against a Dwarf, is what it's called. And it's spelled, you can look it up, it's called I gotta write this down here. With Wergam. I think that's what it is. Now you look at it and it says with, but in Anglo-Saxon, with meant against. With, what in Anglo-Saxon is mid, just like in German. Mid means with, but way back when you had mid and with. With meant against. Now it just means, mid, it means with. With Dwergham was against a dwarf. And in this book, there's all these prayers and rituals that you do to fight against somebody who is being terrorized in their sleep by a dwarf. So dwarves live in the realm of dreams, your subconscious mind. I've placed them in the subconscious mind. And when your lower self is not in alignment with your higher self, which is the elves, the ascended masters, who were once human beings, who are now having achieved their highest awareness, they are no longer in physical form, and their job is to help human beings achieve their highest destiny. So in an ideal scenario, as a human being, when we are operating from our man, our mind, our moon, when we are operating from that, then we are humans. We are the reflection of the soul in physical form. So if you can think of human beings as being like a holographic projection, and it's a fusion of the projection of the dwarf and the elf nature, and comes together in space-time. Dwarves do not have physical reality, and elves have surpassed physical reality. Human beings are right in the middle. And we are the ones that live in Midgard, in Middle Earth. But these mythologies are saying that when we are in alignment, then we overcome the orcs and the evil sorcerers. When we are not in alignment, and in the mythology, that's when the elves are fighting with the dwarves, and humans are sort of in between, and they're not aligned with anybody, means the three selves are not aligned. This is what Tolkien was saying, even though he didn't know it. What Tolkien was saying is that when the three cells of the human being are not in alignment, then that opens up a doorway to be attacked by the orcs and the goblins and the trolls and the evil sorcerers. And that what I love about the Lord of the Rings is that Saruman started out as a good guy. If you see Saruman in The Hobbit, he's a good guy. He is, the most powerful wizard on the planet. He's the leader of the sect of wizards that are running around the world. Once he sees that Sauron is coming into power, and that Sauron is seeking to get all of the 9 rings, which represents the 9 worlds of the human being. All of this symbolism doesn't come out of nowhere. It represents the 9 worlds, represents the 9 elements of the human being, and each one of our 9 essences has a ring of power. And so the idea is that all of these rings come together in a unified sense, and you become a full, complete human. Then you become the Taoist experience of a dragon. But Sauron became tempted by riches and power, specifically power. He wanted power. And he thought that he would be able to overcome Sauron, and so he was drawn down by his own fear, his own greed, his own lust. And so, we live in a dynamic balance where we seek to be in that place of balance. That's why I don't believe in enlightenment. Because if there was such a thing as enlightenment, if we're just talking about the Lord of the Rings mythology, by the way, if you didn't know it, the Lord of the Rings books, Tolkien specifically said he wrote those books to create a modern mythology for the UK. That was his motivation. And, he may have not known it. He may have had his own idea of what he was doing. My understanding of mythology is that mythology is channeled wisdom from the elves. And writers of mythology do not necessarily have to know that that's what they're doing. They may be completely clueless to the fact that they are channeling the knowledge of the ancients. I've noticed this about writers. One of my favorite writers, I have a love-hate relationship with the guy, is David Mamet. One of my favorite playwrights. But he's an absolute idiot when it comes to understanding the art of acting and the art of whenever you watch his movies that he's directed, the actors are very stilted and unnatural, and they're just so focused on the words that they're not acting. Whereas if you take David Mamet's material and you give it to somebody else, and he's not directing it, then it's really brilliant. Like The Untouchables is a good example. It's a great movie. It's a little dated now, but it's a great movie. But if David Mamet were directing it, it would be very stilted, because he's so in love with his own writing that if you don't say the exact word in the right way, so he just squelches the actor's ability to live and breathe his art. But another example would be Castaneda. Carlos Castaneda was a fraud of epic proportions, but he channeled some of the most powerful spiritual wisdom the universe has ever seen. Now, he was stealing from other people, and he was doing this, and he was making himself into something he wasn't. And his last books, he got kind of loopy and lost it. But his first few books are golden. I recommend that everybody read what a warrior is, a spiritual warrior, because he was channeling some very high-level truth. He had no idea he was doing it. And I think the same about Tolkien. Tolkien I don't know, I don't know the guy. Obviously he's dead, but he was channeling wisdom for the modern age in The Lord of the Rings. But you have to know how to interpret what you're seeing. And I'm interpreting what I see in it. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. So a dragon represents, at its base, it represents the reptilian brainstem of the human being. And just like in the fairy tales, you can have good witches and bad witches. So you can have good dragons and you can have evil dragons. And the Norse focused on the negative aspect because dwarves are powerful, and to say somebody is a dwarf is not a put down. It means they are a magical being. They are very magical and powerful. It is the dwarves that literally created the physical reality. According to the mythology, the gods fashioned humanoid dwarves from the life force energy of the giant that was killed, the giant that created all of physical reality. He represents life force energy. And his body, Odin Villian tore his body apart to create space-time.
Hi, I'm Michael Denny of SpiritTao.com, and this is Celestial Negung Part 1. Celestial Negung means that this is power that is descending from heaven. And the idea is that we are all microcosms of the entire universe. You are the entire universe, and everything around you is simply the projection. You are looking within yourself. So when you look up into the stars at night, you're actually looking deep within your own body. When you look at the sun, the moon, the trees, the flowers, you're looking within yourself. This is Negung. And so what we're doing is we're simply releasing that infinity from within us. You are tapping into and releasing the power that is within our own body, our own cells, our own organs. So one of the reasons that I'm making this DVD is in the hope that the essence and the spirit of the teaching of the Shang Qing arts can be taught to the world at large, and it is my hope that the core essence of what the Shang Qing tradition is will continue to live and grow and evolve. As we move on into the Aquarian age, everything is changing. I don't need to tell you that. The entire world is changing, and what we are seeing now is that if people hold on to external things, they are very challenged in life. And those who are making the transition into the next phase that we are moving into in the world as we approach 2012, those who look within and find their source of strength from within, those are the people who are getting the most out of life and will make the transition into the next phase of evolution most comfortably. It is my belief that the Shang Qing tradition is one method whereby human beings can evolve into the next level of being in the most comfortable fashion and be able to take advantage of the rapid, energetic, mental, and spiritual changes that are going on in the world today.
And from that, the gods took life force energy and fashioned humanoid dwarves. In fact, one could make the inference that Odin himself is a dwarf. I won't get into that, but if you read carefully, there's a passage in there that says that Odin himself was a dwarf that achieved his own awareness and achieved his, he didn't go through becoming a human. He just achieved his awareness and his mastery of the physical universe. And so he bypassed everything and bypassed even the gods. Somebody asked me today about, is Zeus Odin? And I said, no, Zeus is not Odin, because the name Zeus is actually, Zeus is the vocative, Z-E-U-S. It's the vocative of D. A temple in Greece was Dion, the place of D. D is his name. We know that as Tyr. Tyr represents the Sky Father. The Sky Father was originally the king of the gods. So Odin is not the original Indo-European king of the gods. We only see that in the Germanic tradition. We see a similar thing happening in Vedic time, because in Vedic time, Indra was the king of the gods. And Shiva was an epithet of, which means, lucky. I forget the word I'm looking for. My brain's not, I'm distracted by something else in my life, so I'm having a hard time focusing, which I can't get into, but. So he means, what's the word? Anyway, lucky, basically. Shiva was an epithet of Indra, another name of Indra. But it became a god in his own right, and he became the king of the gods. So you have you have Shiva in the Vedic, and you have Odin in the Germanic. And both Shiva and Odin share the same root name, which is, in the Norse, his name is Ug, and in the Vedic, his name is Ugra. It's the same word. It means terrifying. And so what I'm saying here is that Odin and Shiva represent evolution, the human being becoming fully evolved and surpassing the gods. Because the gods existed before humans, according to mythology. Human beings are seen by everybody as the epitome of spiritual evolution. But the gods are fixed. They're not going anywhere. They've been gods, and they will always be gods. But Odin achieved his godhood by sacrificing himself on the world tree and finding the runes, the mysteries to the universe. And because of that, he became the king of the gods. Now, this is my interpretation. There's no book. We don't have anything written down that says where Odin came from. But we do know historically that the Indo-Europeans worshipped what we now call Tyr as the sky king, the sky father. So Odin came from somewhere else. And this is why Odin and human beings have such a strong connection. And it was, in fact, in the Norse tradition, in the Volsunga saga, it was Sigurd. Sigurd was guided by Odin, and Odin teaches him how to kill Fafnir the dragon. So what that represents is that Odin, the highest awareness, he who has achieved his highest awareness within himself, he now has this ability where he teaches the human being how to overcome his lower self, his lower vibration, his fear, his greed, because that's what this is about. Sigurd is not fighting somebody else. It represents the fight within us. All of these things are things within us. Okay? So, those are some of my thoughts about dragons in different things. So let's see if we have any questions here. Stephen Purdy says, quote, Confucius, a dragon, okay, so he's giving me the quote that I said earlier. So he's quoting, so it says, Confucius, a dragon can fly into the sky, ride on the clouds, dive into the ocean. A dragon is powerful, yet so intangible to us. Lao Tzu is a dragon, and I'll never understand him. Stephen Purdy question, in the Hobbit movie, they add the heart of the mountain gem. Does this fit into Norse mythology? I'd have to take a look at it to see, the Arkenstone, is that what we're talking about? So the Arkenstone would represent, having ultimate power. And we have Thorin Oakenshield and his father were obsessed with this gem. I think that's what you're talking about. And it represents having ultimate power. And what will happen when you get ultimate power is that ultimate power will consume you and destroy you. Which is why, again, we have the same theme, because in The Hobbit, it is Bilbo who is the only one who can go into the dragon's lair, get the Arkenstone, and come out, and he's not tempted by the power. And he holds on to it. He has the wisdom not to give it to Thorin, because he knows if he gives it to Thorin, it'll destroy him. And so he's the only one that can take it. Just like in the Lord of the Rings, it is Frodo who is the only one who's capable of carrying the Ring of Power, because everybody else will be tempted by it and it will consume them and destroy them. So the hobbits, I'm not familiar with the hobbits. I think that was an invention. I mean, it comes from Hobbes, which were little, gnome things, but he creates his own creation, calls them hobbits. But it represents, true innocence and true, the truest aspect of human beings. All of these things represent something within us. And so it's that part of us that has no agenda, that just wants to enjoy life, that is humble, that doesn't seek power or riches or glory. They just want to live in their little hobbit hole and have their food, and they just want to enjoy nature and enjoy life. This aspect of us is the balancing force within us. Balances the human nature, the dwarf nature, the elf nature, the orc nature, the sorcerer nature, the wizard nature. Even Gandalf would not have been able to, if you gave him the Ring of Power, it would have consumed him and destroyed him. The elf queen, you couldn't give her the Ring of Power, it would have destroyed her. The only person that could handle it was Frodo. And same with Bilbo. Bilbo was the only one who could handle the Arkenstone and not have it destroy him. So to answer your question, whether that fits in Norse mythology or not, I'm not sure. But I think, again, mythology is like any knowledge, spiritual knowledge. The idea is that as time goes on, we're getting more and more evolved, and so spiritual knowledge and spiritual practices are getting more and more evolved. And hopefully I'm having something to do with that. If somebody comes along and they can channel information or take existing knowledge and syncretize it and bring it up to the next level, that's the goal. And I think that Tolkien was doing that. I don't think he was consciously doing it, but he was taking Norse mythology and he was he was putting it through the grinder and putting it in the cauldron of his wisdom, and he was coming out with a higher vibration of the same mythology, because it's all connected. And if you look at that and compare it to the old one, you can see the evolution of it there. All right, what else? Yeah, I don't see anything here. I don't see any more questions. So, all right. So, not a lot to say here. So, go to courses.thunderwizard.com for all of my books, all of my videos, all of my DVDs, all that good stuff. And there's a lot more stuff coming, hopefully. My plan is to continue to unveil new stuff and try and get as much information out there before I end up having to leave in a few months. And then I'm going to continue to do this. My goal is to have the business aspect of what I'm doing sort of running on its own while I spend all the rest of my time doing videos. And that's my hope. When I get to Australia and New Zealand, I'm going to be focusing more on videos than I am on these other things. But if you want to support what I'm doing here, the easiest thing to do is to go on to thunderwizard.com and subscribe. That's the easiest way to support it. Of course, also go to courses.thunderwizard.com and take advantage of all the stuff that's there, because all of those products and those services go to me being able to do what I'm doing here today, answering questions. And again, I have until maybe just a little over a month. Has it been that long? Before I can come back, the late March. Then I can come back, and are we in January or February? Where are we at? We're in February. So, yeah, another month it looks like. And then I'll be able to come and do the live Q&As on YouTube. So there's that. I'll check and see if there's any last minute questions, and if not, then I will call it an evening. Yeah. So Stephen Purdy, that's another way of kind of saying the same thing. He says he believes hobbits represented us mortals who did not seek the modern world. I mean, there's definitely that. The modern world represents, um, money and power and possessions and a departure from the natural world. And hobbits are definitely creatures of the natural world, and so you can definitely use that. I have no problem with that interpretation. I think that goes well with what I said as well. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. All right. So that's it for now, my friends. I will see you later. Oh, Dean Nevins just showed up with a question. Question: how can I learn more about how to decode the symbols of mythology? That's a good question. That's a hard one to answer because there's you can read books and see what people say, and there's something to be gained from that. But I think at some point, I use language, as you know. I use language to help my intellect to track down the roots of a deity, for instance. But it is my intuition and my inner wisdom that goes beyond words that comes to the conclusion. And then I use all that other information to explain it. But all of that intellectual knowledge ultimately doesn't teach you anything, as is evidenced by there's no shortage of rune teachers and either academics who try to interpret mythology, or in the case of the northern tradition, we have heathens and pagans who are trying to decode mythology. And a lot of the stuff I read, they just don't have a clue what they're doing. They just don't know. Let me give you an example. Like, why does Thor have to wear metal gloves to pick up his hammer, which is the lightning? And I can remember going online and seeing somebody trying to guess. They didn't even know. They were just guessing why. And maybe it's because of this, and maybe because the handle is short, and maybe all that other stuff. Whereas for me, I look at it and the answer is very clear. That the lightning represents our electromagnetic chi power, our energy. And our hands we have this power through our hands to release this energy. And, until we open up the meridians of the hands, we cannot send the lightning, which is the energy, out of our body. So what is something that electricity, that electricity uses? Metal, metal, the lightning rod, metal. He has to have metal gloves on, which represents opening up the meridians of the hand to be able to transfer the energy. That's not going to come from a book. That's going to come from personal experience combined with intellectual knowledge, combined with intuition of the spirit. So you have to have all these three things. So how can you learn more about to decode the symbols of mythology? You got to do all of them. Do as much reading as you can. Read about the symbolism of what things mean. And research mythology, and then meditate on it, and practice it. See, here's the thing. I talked about Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching earlier. Most people think that the Tao Te Ching is a philosophical, spiritual book, which it is. But it is also, if you know how to decode it, it will also teach you about the Tai Chi martial art. It will teach you how to move energy. It will teach you how to meditate. And there are symbols in there that represent the different energy centers in the body, but you have to know how to decode those symbols. So you can find teachers. If you can find a teacher who knows how to take a text from the Tao Te Ching and say, this is how you apply it in Taoist martial arts, they'll be able to show you a really intense, powerful thing. Or a meditator, somebody who's a Taoist meditation master, will say, oh, this phrase in the Tao Te Ching is talking about opening up this energy center in the body. But it doesn't mean that that's the only thing. It also means exactly what people say. If you have nothing to defend, then you can't be a target. And that is purely philosophical and it's symbolic. It means that if you're not attached to your physical possessions, then nobody can steal anything from you because your strength comes from just being a human being. You can interpret it on all different levels. So what you're asking is, how do I take it to the next level? And that comes through experience, through study, and through your own intuition. So only time will give you the ability to do that. In the meantime, always be meditating on it. You know, you can, like, if there's something in one of the mythological teachings that you don't know what the symbolism means, meditate on it. You know, meditate on, why does Thor need metal gloves to pick up the hammer? Why is when Thor's hammer is stolen by the giant, I forget the giant's name, one of the giants steals his hammer, he buries it under the ground, 8 miles under the ground, or 8 days, something with the number 8 underground. What does that mean? Well, there are 8 worlds here. What does that mean? You know, it has something to do with that connection, the number 8. And if you can master that, I will take my hat off to you. I haven't completely gotten to the understanding of it, but I know it's there for a reason. You know, all of those things are there for a reason. There's nothing arbitrary in any of the mythology. And it's just a question of whether or not you can uncover it. So there's my answer to that question. All right, that's it. Nothing else for me. We're coming up on an hour. All right, so I've done all my business. Thank you, my friends, and may the power of the dragon be with you and guide you towards your highest evolution.
Okay, so be honest with me. You have tried practicing the law of attraction in your life. You have sat on the edge of your bed and you have focused on positive feelings and focused on bringing up good feelings about things that you want in your life, and you've had little or no results. If you're honest, in my experience, the majority of people who have really tried to use the law of attraction to manifest their dreams have been disappointed, and in some cases outright frustrated, and in some cases their lives got worse. Now there is an actual reason for that, and that is because the law of attraction actually doesn't work unless it is combined with the law of manifestation. And sadly, most of the law of attraction teachers out there, many of them well-intentioned, are only giving half of the recipe for being successful when it comes to intending and manifesting your life. My name is Michael William Denny of the ThunderWizard.com YouTube channel. And just like you, years ago, I tried sitting on the edge of my bed and focusing on positive feelings. I tried to keep myself in a positive state of mind, and very little happened. And as a result, it was very hard for me to keep those positive feelings coming. And then I was told that, well, you have negative things in your life because you're focusing on too many negative things. But the problem was I couldn't turn my negative feelings off. But here's something that I've learned, and this is incredibly important. I want you to listen to this. You don't have to monitor your feelings. You can have all kinds of negative feelings. You can have sadness, you can have fear, you can have resentment, all of these so-called negative feelings that are supposed to bring you all kinds of negative things. You can have these feelings, and if you know how to practice the law of manifestation, it doesn't matter how you feel. And that to me was so liberating. Because listen, there's a lot of people out there feeling guilty and feeling unspiritual because they do have less than perfect feelings. And when things aren't manifesting the way they want, guess what happens? Naturally, you have negative feelings coming up. And if you've been told that your negative feelings will bring negative things, then you are then filled in with this feeling of guilt and shame, and then you go into this cycle of guilt and shame, and you can never get out of it. And it doesn't matter how many seminars you go to, or how many books you read, or how many videos you watch of people telling you if you focus on positive things will happen. None of that matters, because now you're filled with all of these negative feelings, and then you're afraid to take any action, and then nothing happens in your life. So I'm here to free you from all of that. It doesn't matter how you feel. The only thing that matters is, do you know how to properly intend? And that is what the law of manifestation is. When you combine that, then guess what happens? You start to have some positive feelings come back into your life, and then guess what happens? Then you can merge the law of attraction, because you can take those positive feelings and you can merge it with the law of manifestation, and you can focus that energy into your intentions. And then, in my experience, the law of attraction and the law of manifestation works every time. It has worked for me. I'm sitting here in front of my house. I'm not kidding you. My house is right over there. And I simply walked out of the front door of my house this morning and decided to make a video and tell you my experience of the law of manifestation and the law of attraction. So, if you want to get started, click the link and go to thunderwizard.com and look for the Manifestation Mastery course and click on that to get started.